So we have good news and we have bad news coming out of Alberta. The good news is that they're going towards phase two. The bad news is a lot of stores and gyms and whatnot that I've seen are still not going to reopen. So again, this is the problem that I've been bringing up for a while now, that because people have been so scared and lied to and um, brainwashed to believe that this is the worst thing ever, a lot of these stores and a lot of people are still deathly afraid to go back to normal. And this is the problem that I've been bringing up. And again, it just goes to show that I've been pretty much spot on when it comes to most of this stuff. I don't mean to brag, but because I pay so close attention to this kind of stuff, especially with not having anything to do, I've been able to do even more research than I normally do. It's just blatantly obvious, and it's entirely predictable. It's entirely predictable that the problem being, I would say, is fear is a greater motivator than whatever you want to consider the opposite of fear, optimism, whatever you want to call it. And this is the problem that the government has and the mainstream media has scared people into believing that this is the doomsday virus when there's all the evidence points towards the exact opposite of that. And this is something that I pointed out, but I want to point it out again because people, a lot of people, mostly not people watching this, members of the general public just don't get it. And this whole virus thing has shown me that the overwhelming majority of the public, again, probably not people watching this video, but they're completely irrational. I literally have lost faith in probably 90% of people, and for the simple reason that they have no ability whatsoever to think critically, none whatsoever. And thinking critically doesn't necessarily mean you're right. It usually would, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're right. It means evaluating costs and benefits. It means admitting when you're wrong. When you're wrong, it means constantly questioning your beliefs and the society's beliefs in general. That's pretty much what thinking critically means. Now, what would that look like if all the general public did that? Well, what it would look like is, okay, everybody would realize that this is entirely a scam. It is entirely a scam. There's so many numbers to bring up to it, almost like I forget to bring up a lot of these stuff, but a lot of the stuff. Um, Again, so let's just point it out from a logical point of view. Okay, well, what would need to have happened for the pro lockdown crowd to have been right all along and still to be right? Well, what would have needed to happen is the death rate would have had to have stayed or even increased at that 3 to 5% mark, where whoever you take it from. The asymptomatic spread would have to be as bad or worse than we originally thought. We now know that the asymptomatic spread, and this is even according to the WHO, is much less likely than we originally thought. Um, I mean, it is comparable to the flu as well for most people. There's so many things. I mean, another thing to point out too is that the places that have been early in reopening, and the places who didn't even close in the first place, would need to have had significant spread. So the point being is that the lockdown. Another thing too is that, okay, well, did the lockdowns work? Okay, well, you have to compare places that locked down to places that didn't lock down, and places that have been open for longer and places that have still been closed. The reason why, and again, so it basically points towards the people that have been anti-lockdown have had pretty much every new piece of evidence that comes out has been in their favor. I mean, the death rate being much lower than we originally thought, asymptomatic spread being much lower than we originally thought, the places that have reopened soonest have had no issues. The places that never even closed to begin with have had little to no issues. Again, people always point out Sweden has had a higher death rate or even spread than the average. But what they don't point out is that, number one, it's not high compared to the highest countries. There's several countries that have had higher death rate and spread. And they also don't tell you that the amount of people that die on average in Sweden is still almost exactly where where it is in the average year. So the idea that the virus has had a significant impact, or not closing things down has had a significant negative impact on Sweden, there's no evidence to back that up. I mean, you have countries like Japan that never fully closed; they've had no issues. You had South Dakota that never fully closed, no issues. You had Florida and Georgia have both been open for over a month now, no issues whatsoever. And again, you can't make the urban versus rural area because Florida has some big cities. I mean, Georgia has Atlanta. That's a very big city. So the idea that, oh well, I mean, you could maybe make that argument for South Dakota, but the stats don't bear out too, because why does New York have such a higher amount of deaths than Los Angeles, for example, or Dallas or Houston? I mean, those are also very big cities, and they haven't had nearly the spread. The reason why the outbreak got so bad in the first place, and the reason why it got better, has nothing to do with the government. The thing that the pro-lockdown crowd continuously gets wrong is that they think that when you inevitably point out that the numbers are way better than we originally thought and what they originally predicted, they'll point, oh, it's because of the lockdown. Well, no, it isn't. Because why have certain areas been hit so much harder than others then? I mean, if the lockdowns work, then the places that reopened the soonest should have seen a second wave by now, and the places that have stayed closed should have consistently seen numbers drop, but we didn't see that. We didn't see that in New York. We didn't see that in Quebec. We didn't see that in Ontario. We didn't see that in Alberta. The numbers peaked in Alberta in mid-April, mid to late April, and we were closed down since this third week of March. So that if anything, the numbers should have been trending down consistently since like April, like early April, but they didn't start trending down till more late April. So again, there's no correlation between the lockdowns and the reduce in spread. If there is, it's so small that it's barely noticeable. So that's something that they also continuously get wrong. So anyway, this is from California. I'm sure most people have probably seen this video, but it's a drone going over one of the main streets in Los Angeles, I believe, and it's just packed with people, just packed with people. And like again, it just the hypocrisy and the cognitive dissonance is absolutely off the charts with people nowadays. Like, 2 weeks ago, if you wanted to have a family get together, if you wanted to get your 10, 15 people together for Mother's Day, you were the worst person in the world. Even for people that want to try and call me biased. No, like Doug Ford, he called those people in Toronto that were at the park, oh, they're selfish and they're going to get people killed. Like, no, Doug Ford, you're an idiot. So again, you can't make the bias argument, because I've been ragging on Doug Ford and Jason Kenney this whole time. Again, Jason Kenney constantly tweeting and talking about, oh, the virus isn't nearly as bad as we thought it was, but yet you waited over about a month to go to phase two. Like, I mean, there's a 2 week incubation period. If there's not a rise in 2 weeks, what are you waiting for? Like, what are you waiting for? So again, I put almost as much blame on the Doug Fords and the Jason Kennys of the world as I do the Justin Trudeau's of the world. But I mean, the difference being is that Jason Kenney and Doug Ford don't have the power, or at least I don't believe they do, because I believe international airports are federal jurisdiction. I may be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure it's only the federal government that has the power to say no flights from China, no flights from Italy, so on and so forth. And that is why the numbers got so bad in the first place. The numbers got so bad in places like New York because Governor Cuomo, the guy whose approval rating went up somehow, um, ordered sick people or people that were sick into nursing homes. That's one of the main reasons things got so bad. One of the main reasons things got so bad in Ontario and Quebec is for the same reason too, that you had these health inspectors that were afraid to go into some of these nursing homes because they were rampant with people that were sick. They didn't want to get it themselves. And I mean, the government dropped the ball as well, too. So this is the many problems of this, is that the virus got bad in the first place because the government let it get bad. And the virus got better because it will get better pretty much no matter what you do. It has nothing to do with the lockdowns. Like, I can't stress that enough. Um, so getting back to the other important stuff that's been in the news these days, now that I've made my virus rants for the day, this is something I believe I've talked about before, but again, it's such an important point that I wanted to bring it up again. It's from Larry Elder. He say, assume there's a vaccine against white racism. Would 70% of black kids still be raised in fatherless homes? Would 50% still drop out of many urban high schools? would 25% still have criminal records? Would blacks still kill 7,000 other blacks every year? Now, again, all of those numbers are not affected by racism, and for this we know this beyond a shadow of a doubt just by flat out thinking critically, and we also know it because if you look at these numbers and you go back 100 years, you go back to the 1920s, you go back to the 1930s, blacks overwhelmingly stayed together. I mean, single parenthood amongst blacks was rare. They graduated from high school more. They were less likely to become criminals. They didn't kill nearly as many of each other as before. So, and the point being is that objectively, there is no debate that there was more racism back in the 20s, the 30s, uh, than there was now. There is no debate of that because there was little literal laws on the book that allowed and condoned literal racism back then. There was no laws on the book there that condone and accept racism nowadays. There is no such thing as systemic oppression and all that kind of garbage. It's not true. Does racism still exist? Absolutely, but the idea that it disproportionately affects blacks, there's no evidence that actually backs that up. People just seem to repeat it ad nauseum. Again, you constantly hear it from the Justin Trudeau's of the world. It's the classic tell a lie often enough and people will believe it kind of thing. And the reason that they believe it is that how the left gets elected is by virtue signaling. They don't get elected by actually fixing problems. They need problems to exist in the first place because if they didn't, then how would they get people to vote for them? So again, it's something to bring up too that if Black Lives, the way that I don't really take Black Lives Matter seriously, not because I hate blacks or I'm racist or anything, but because fixing these problems that I have here, would do infinite amount of times more positive for the black community than reducing the incredibly small amount of racism that comes from the police and from the system. Uh, and I'll get to that later. So um, this is from Stefan Molyneux. And again, he makes a very good point here, a very good point that I didn't realize until, I mean, I realized that I just didn't think of it this way. And he said it's not about racism. Marx was an appalling racist, and his statues are untouched. It's a bottomless hatred of white Christian, I would say, also add in non-leftist conservative males, and even women to a degree as well, but mainly the men. You know, the same people who ended slavery worldwide and founded the most free countries the world has ever seen. Now, again, the real goal here is communism, is socialism. That is the real goal. And for the simple reason that if it was about racism, where are they on Marx? He was clearly and clearly anti-Semitic. I mean, you read any of his stuff. I'm not any of his stuff, but it's very easy to figure out that he's anti-Semitic and he was racist. So, and again, don't. One of the arguments you hear about is, oh, it was a different time back then. Now, again, no, 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 no. You guys don't get that. You don't get that excuse because you're the same kind of people that want to tear down statues of people that were racist even prior to Marx. So, again, you don't get to make that example because the argument you're making by making that argument is okay, well, we let leftists off the hook for being racist in the past, but not people that we don't like. Again, you can't claim the old George Washington had slaves, therefore we have to tear down any of his statues, but Marx is completely okay because it's a different time and the ideas were different. No, no, no. That's not how it works. You either have consistent and universal morals and ethics or you don't have ethics at all. That's not how it works. Because the minute they become selective, things go south and they go south really fast. So again, that's something to bring up that is very important for people to understand. This is from Brandon Tatum. Now, again, this is the numbers that back up what I was saying. That people say, oh, blacks are systematically oppressed. They're disproportionately likely to be targeted by police. That's not the case. Again, Brandon Tatum tweets this out. This chart is exactly why things will never change. BLM can be honest about anything. They clearly overlook the elephant in the room to point fingers. They should spend more time stopping that 53.94 number, and that it is a chart. I'll enlarge it here to show people. And it's from FBI crime reports. So again, none of this, oh, they're biased numbers, they're made up. No, it's literally from the FBI. So blacks killed by whites, 0.77 per 1 million. Whites killed by blacks, 9.83. Whites killed by whites, 10.22, and blacks killed by blacks, 53.94. So the point being is that, number one, blacks are much more likely to kill a black than vice versa. Blacks are much more likely to commit hate crimes against whites than vice versa. And again, the most by far the biggest killer of blacks is other blacks. So again, if Black Lives Matter so much, then you got to take a long, hard look at this number, because if you care about lives, you don't get to ignore the elephant in the room and to point fingers at the mouse, because that's literally what they're doing. The mouse is the number of blacks killed by whites, including cops, and the elephant is the amount of blacks killed by other blacks. So again, if Black Lives Matter so much, you got to take a long, hard look in the mirror and stop pretending like racism is what's um, contributing to the amount of pain and suffering that's going on in the black community right now, because it's not true. It's objectively not true. And the other big thing too is that one of the main reasons why people are against Black Lives Matter is that they're generally white people who are sick and tired of being called racist for stuff that they didn't do, they didn't contribute to, and the generalization that they're making isn't even true to begin with either. So that's the problem too, is that not only did no whites today own slaves, not only did the overwhelming majority of whites not racist, less likely to be racist than blacks, they're being blamed for stuff that they didn't do. And the problem is that it is hurting them. Pretending like all of these things are just, oh, it's just a matter of equality. No, it's not equality. You know, women wanted equality. Look what they have now. They have superiority. They have many rights that men don't have. So again, it's not about equality. It's not about equality. And for all the people out there that still believe in this garbage, the reason why people disagree with you is not because they're racist. It's that they're tired of being called racist when they didn't do anything. And they're tired of being racist for pointing out the actual solutions to the problem and being ignored. That is why people are mad at you. It's a problem that doesn't exist.
And when you do that, you only stir up more hatred, more animosity. That's the big problems here. Now again, here's another number that backs it up too. So, as this Michael Tracy points out, according to the Washington Post database, a total of 41 unarmed people were shot and killed by the U.S. police in 2019. The racial composition of victims goes as follows: whites 19, blacks 9, Hispanics 6, other 4, unknown 3. So again, the other and the unknowns would maybe sway things, but here's what people inevitably point out when you point this out. Um, the argument goes as follows: people point out whites are killed by police than blacks, and then the pro Black Lives Matter crowd will point out, oh well, blacks are more likely to be killed by police than whites, which is I believe it's true. And the argument that easily debunks that is, okay, well, blacks are, yeah, they're more likely to be um, killed by police, but they're even more likely to commit crime. So the simple example goes as follows: blacks are, I believe, about 15% of the U.S. population. They are killed, but they're 25% of police shooting victims. So people say, oh, that's proof. But what they don't tell you is that blacks commit about 50% of violent crimes. So the more the violent crimes you're committing, the more likely you're going to have interactions with police. Like, I mean, it's just, and not only that too, they're the most likely you're going to have um, confrontations with police that turn violent. Because if you're having an armed robbery, you're raping someone, you're killing someone, and the cops come upon you, the cops catch you, it's going to be a lot more likely to end with deadly force, because you just committed a crime that will throw you in jail for the most of the rest of your life, if not the rest of your life, which means people are probably going to be a lot more likely to want to fight to the death to try and get away with it. So The idea that blacks are overrepresented is not true. If anything, blacks are underrepresented, and for the simple reason that blacks commit more crimes. That is, if any, like I say, if anything, they're underrepresented. If anything, the numbers of people killed by police should reflect closely to the percentage of crime that is committed, the percentage of violent crime that is committed. And when you take it that way, blacks are actually underrepresented, if anything. So, anyway, that's about all as far as the video goes today. If you liked it, make sure to hit that like and subscribe. Check out my PayPal and email. I got a link in the description. Again, appreciate any donations, but at the very least, just hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. And last couple things, as always, check me out on Twitter if you haven't already, and check me out on BitChute if you haven't already. All the links are in the description, so you can find them all there.